Next time on Sneak Previews, we'll review 5 more movies, including Cruising, the controversial new Al Pacino thriller set in the homosexual world, The Last Married Couple in America, a domestic comedy with George Siskel and Natalie Wood, and Saturn III, the science fiction adventure starring Kirk Douglas and Farrah Fawcett.
Night Games, an erotic thriller about a woman's sexual fantasies, The Human Factor, a new British spy puzzle, and Coal Miner's Daughter with Sissy Spacek, starring in the life story of country music singing star Loretta Lynn. Nijinsky, a biography of the great ballet immortal, Ffolkes with Jodie Foster as a streetwise Los Angeles teenager, and Serial, a comedy about modern living and loving in Northern California.
Ffolkes, a thriller starring Roger Moore, Where the Buffalo Roam with Bill Murray as the maverick journalist Hunter S. Thompson, and Nothing Personal, a romantic comedy starring Donald Sutherland and Suzanne Summers. The Second Coming of George Burns in Oh God, Book 2. Christopher Reeve, the man who played Superman, now in a wistful love story, Somewhere in Time. And Woody Allen's new film, Stardust Memories, the pleasures and pains of being a celebrity.
Private Benjamin, a comedy enlisting Goldie Hawn in the Army. Why Would I Lie, an offbeat love story about an eccentric welfare worker. And Gloria, starring Jenna Rollins as a mobster's girlfriend who winds up protecting a 7-year-old boy. And The First Deadly Sin with Frank Sinatra as a New York cop on the trail of a psychotic killer. The Awakening, starring Charlton Heston as an archaeologist who digs up a mummy's curse. And The Stunt Man, the story of a movie director who plays God with his actors.
Times Square, the story of 2 runaway teenage girls who call themselves the Sleaze Sisters. Borderline, starring Charles Bronson as a policeman out to nail some smugglers on the Mexican border. And Kagemusha, the epic drama of a 16th century Japanese warlord. Raging Bull, starring Robert De Niro as fighter Jake LaMotta. Any Which Way You Can, the new Clint Eastwood comedy. And 9 to 5 with Lily Tomlin, Dolly Parton, and Jane Fonda as secretaries out to get their boss.
The Jazz Singer, starring Neil Diamond as a singer who tries to break into the big time. A Change of Seasons with Anthony Hopkins having a midlife crisis inspired by Bo Derek. And Seems Like Old Times, the new comedy that reteams Chevy Chase and Goldie Hawn. Fort Apache, the Bronx, starring Paul Newman as a troubled cop. The Devil and Max Devlin, a comedy with Bill Cosby. And The Incredible Shrinking Woman, starring Lily Tomlin as a miniature housewife.
We'll review The Competition, starring Richard Dreyfuss and Amy Irving as classical pianists who fall in love. The Dogs of War, a thriller with Christopher Walken as a mercenary soldier, and Tess, Roman Polanski's adaptation of the famous Thomas Hardy novel. Sunday Lovers, a romantic comedy with Gene Wilder. My Bloody Valentine, about some college kids attending a very scary party. And The Last Metro, Francois Truffaut's new film about the German occupation of France during World War II. It stars Catherine Deneuve.
Thief with James Caan as a professional crook. Rockshow, a musical documentary with Paul McCartney. And The Final Conflict, the 3rd and final chapter in the Omen series of thrillers.
Hardly Working, the new Jerry Lewis comedy. The Howling, a thriller with people turning into werewolves. And Breaker Morant, the story of an Australian court-martial.
Tell Me a Riddle, starring Melvin Douglas in a drama about the trials of old age. Lion of the Desert with Anthony Quinn fighting in Libya against Mussolini's army. And Windwalker with Trevor Howard in the story of a Cheyenne Indian family and their fight for survival.
Outland, starring Sean Connery as a sheriff in outer space. The Legend of the Lone Ranger, a retelling of the masked man's life story. And Take This Job and Shove It, a story about a man trapped on a corporate ladder.
We'll take a look at Cheech and Chong's Nice Dreams, the new sex and drugs comedy. I Sent a Letter to My Love with Simone Signoret as a woman who carries on a secret romance with her brother. And History of the World Part 1, the new musical comedy by Mel Brooks.
The adventure film Raiders of the Lost Ark, starring Harrison Ford as a heroic archaeologist. Also, City of Women, Federico Fellini's latest extravaganza, an investigation of modern man's reaction to the women's movement.
Burt Reynolds in the cross-country comedy The Cannonball Run. Life in the Army with Bill Murray and Stripes. And Christopher Reeve romancing Margot Kidder in the summer's big sequel, Superman 2.
Roger Moore in trouble again in the latest James Bond thriller, For Your Eyes Only. Also, a story of dragons, sorcerers, and a magic amulet in Dragonslayer. And Miss Piggy and friends dancing their way into your hearts in the second Muppet movie, The Great Muppet Caper. Endless Love, a drama about teenage romantic obsession starring Brooke Shields. Blowout, a thriller with John Travolta on the trail of a political murder. And Zorro the Gay Blade, a new comedy starring George Hamilton. Wolfen, a thriller about werewolf attacks in New York City. Eye of the Needle with Donald Sutherland as a German spy during World War II. And Tarzan the Ape Man with Bo Derek in the Jungle. Carbon Copy, a new comedy with George Siskel as a father surprised by his newfound black son. Prince of the City with Treat Williams as a narcotics cop involved in police corruption, and The French Lieutenant's Woman, starring Meryl Streep in the romantic title role.
Body and Soul, starring Leon Isaac Kennedy and Jane Kennedy, and Looker, starring Albert Finney, tracking a murderer.
Time Bandits, a time travel adventure created by some of the Monty Python gang. Also, The Woman Next Door, Francois Truffaut's latest film about obsessive love, and The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper, the hijack film starring Robert Duvall and Treat Williams.
Tattoo, a new thriller with Bruce Dern and Maude Adams, and Raggedy Man, the Sissy Spacek film. She plays a struggling young mother.
Neighbors, starring John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, Sharky's Machine, starring Burt Reynolds as an undercover cop, and Pennies from Heaven, the new musical extravaganza with Steve Martin and Bernadette Peters. Shoot the Moon, starring Diane Keaton and Albert Finney, in the story of a marriage in crisis. Montenegro, an offbeat comedy with Susan Anspach, in the story of a marriage in crisis. And One from the Heart, starring Nastasia Kinski in Francis Coppola's romantic fantasy of a couple in crisis.
Cannery Row, the John Steinbeck epic starring Nick Nolte. Night Crossing, a new daring adventure escape from Disney. And Making Love, a contemporary love story starring Kate Jackson.
Quest for Fire, a science fantasy set in the distant past. And Union City with rock star Deborah Harry in a 1940s-style thriller.
Missing, starring Jack Lemmon and Sissy Spacek. Caught in a South American police state. And The Seduction with Morgan Fairchild as a TV newscaster under fire.
Das Boot, a World War II adventure film about Nazi submariners. Also Porky's, a teenage sex comedy. And the murder mystery Death Trap with Christopher Reeve and Michael Caine. A Little Sex, a romantic comedy starring Tim Matheson and Kate Capshaw. And Some Kind of Hero, starring Richard Pryor as a returning Vietnam vet.
Death Wish 2, with Charles Bronson as an urban vigilante once again. And The Sword and the Sorcerer, an action-adventure movie.
Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, another spin-off to the popular TV program. Also Grease 2, a musical tribute to the high school class now of 1961.
Clint Eastwood in a new adventure called Firefox, and Al Pacino as a Broadway playwright in Author.
Blade Runner, starring Harrison Ford as a futuristic detective, and Diner, the story of 4 young men coming of age.
Tron, Disney's new animated fantasy, about a young man who enters the world of a video game. And Midsummer Night's sex comedy, Woody Allen's new film.
A Midsummer Night's sex comedy starring Woody Allen, Young Doctors in Love, a spoof of TV soap operas, and The World According to Garp with Robin Williams, based on John Irving's novel.
And we'll take a look at The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, a musical comedy starring Dolly Parton and Burt Reynolds, and also Night Shift, a comedy starring Henry Winkler. The Road Warrior, a futuristic adventure film, and The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, starring Dolly Parton. Until then, we'll see you at the movies.
Funding for sneak previews was provided by this station and by other public television stations.